Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the German football podcast. And I'm saying German football podcast because this is, of course, the reaction podcast to Germany's 1-1 draw against Spain. I'm Manu and Stefan. He's Stefan Biankowski. Stefan, we are literally recording this, 10 minutes after the final whistle. I think we're going back and forth. Should we do it tomorrow? Should we do it today? I think ultimately it's kind of good to do this when it's still all fresh in your head, right? And a little bit emotional. I just spent the last 90 minutes pacing up and down my living room. You probably have had a little bit of a better experience than I did, being more neutral.
Yeah, I don't have blood in the game, so I was kind of okay, more or less, you know. And I also have a bit of a soft spot for Spain, so I did kind of think, well, do you know what? If they put the final nail in the coffin for this Germany side, then it's not the end of the world.
Yeah,
I kind of feel like the World Cup right now as a collective, or maybe look at this Germany team the same way that like Sarah Connor looked at the Terminator and thinking, why won't you die? You know, like it's just kind of like somehow better teams have already been knocked out of this competition and somehow Germany are still in it. But we'll get into that through this podcast, I'm sure.
Oh man, like what was the joke that Chris Williams made in our group chat? Is like they're going to lose this game, win their last game, still get out of the group and win it all overall. He's a lot more optimistic than I am. My fear now is that Germany is going to ruin my holiday in Hawaii.
By not getting knocked out.
By not getting knocked out. You know I cursed at the moment I booked that trip, right? Regardless, they're still alive. We have a ton to talk about. This match had so many storylines that we need to go through. And I think pros and cons, we're going to do that as well. So let's just dive into it right after this break. This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. Basketball is back. And BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. And is your continued source for all sports wagering information. BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports and events, whether that's NFL, NBA, NHL, MMA, tennis, boxing, or even golf. Head to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to receive your rewards. That's it, BLEAV, to receive your rewards. BetOnline, where the game starts. Yeah, Stefan, I think here's my number one take away from this game. Spain bring on a number 9. They take the lead. Germany bring on a number 9 and they draw. You need a number 9. The game has changed. The times of you not being able to play with a number 9, you know what Spain used to do quite a bit. Those days are over. You need a guy in the box who can just put it away. And this is my number one takeaway from this game. The 2 goals that were ultimately scored were the ultimate number 9 goals.
Yeah. It's a really interesting one. It's almost like there's a kind of sea change in football right now where we've had so much time spent on like possession and very technical players, and now it just kind of feels like even the very best nations and even the best club teams, you know, if you want to open this up to like Manchester City and Liverpool, both signing huge number 9s in the summer. We talk extensively on this podcast about Bayern Munich trying to be smart in the replacement of Robert Lewandowski and struggling. And on a national scale, you have France, who, despite having all the talent in the world and maybe being able to put out 3 teams that could challenge in the World Cup, they ultimately still rely on Olivier Giroud. And Spain have got Alvaro Morata, who's now got 7 goals in 9 games. And when he scored that goal in this game, I really did think, God, you know what, Germany would give... I think Hansi Flick would probably happily give up half his team just to have someone like Alvaro Morata in his team. But he didn't have to, because he had a number 9 in there, and he did the job for them eventually.
I think this is such a great story. Credit to the commentator at the game. I didn't stick up the stat myself, but I think it's a great story. 1 year ago, Niklas Füllkrug scored the only goal for Werder Bremen in a second Bundesliga match against Holstein Kiel. Exactly to the day, 1 year ago. And then he comes on and terminates his way into, because this was like a muscling off the ball. It's such a classic goal, isn't it? Just like bulged the top of the net. Like, you almost feel like the net was almost like hinged off its goalpost. That's how massive that strike was. And it was, I almost felt like, okay, we've been waiting for this kind of goal since Miroslav Klose has retired. You know, someone to just be in the box and be cruel and just put the bloody thing away, for my language. But it was so absolutely necessary to have him there. And I think too, I said in the bonus pod last week, right, that I think you need to start with a number 9. And I wanted to see Moukoko there. Okay, well, Moukoko didn't come on, right? But instead it was Füllkrug. And regardless, he got the job done. And I'm just so very happy for him as a person, because he is a player who always had a lot of potential. I think he tore his ACL twice, right? And then kind of like was kind of discarded a little bit by Werder Bremen initially, and then came back, and it was almost again discarded during that second division season that I just mentioned. And then they go up. No one really thinks about Werder Bremen being a good team. And he has essentially led Werder Bremen to a really good start in the Bundesliga campaign as well. And it's kind of almost like a resurrection of a career that started very promising and then seemed to just fizzle out like it does for so many guys. And, you know, there is this picture of him after he scores with his smile and his one tooth missing. He almost looks like a hockey player. But you know what? Germany for such a long time was dominated by people like him. And then we went to all these fancy footwork guys. I feel like we need him. This is the type of player you need.
No, absolutely. An interesting thing as well is that it's almost like it was almost like an interesting moment in terms of like the comparisons to what had come before, as you talked about, not just in terms of like the players that had come before and the way the players that Germany now produce, but like the way that Hansi Flick was approaching this game. And, you know, following that first game against Japan, there were so many comparisons to Jogi Löw, and I think a lot of German fans were saying, well, nothing's really changed here. We're still this kind of placid team that try to pass the ball about, and we have 6 or 7 chances, but because we don't have a striker on the pitch, we always miss them. And, you know, that was kind of coming to bear in this game. That Jamal Musiala miss was one that stood out to me as thinking, you know, God, you would have put your house on Musiala scoring that goal for Bayern Munich, but it's the fact that Germany don't have a striker on the pitch to be in that position to score it. And it was just so telling that Hansi Flick almost, I mean, he'd obviously never say this in public, but it's almost like he decided, right, I'm not going to do what, you know, Jogi Löw done in the past, where he'd stick to his guns and just see the game out with his forwards and with his system. And he's like, I'm just going to throw this number 9 on. And it couldn't have been more, you know, dramatic, and as if like, it's not even as if like he just bundled the ball over the net with a header or it bumped off his shoulder or something. He quite literally took the ball from under Jamal Musiala's feet in almost the exact same position that Musiala missed from like 10 minutes earlier, and fires it into the roof of the net. It's almost like this kind of like, like an act of God or something, where he just
It
comes
was
out
a
of
number
nowhere.
9 goal. That's what a number 9 does.
Yeah.
A number 9 takes the ball from another guy who he thinks doesn't score and is selfish and puts the bloody thing away.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I just thought that was quite a powerful moment, because it was a physical act that differentiated Hansi
Yeah.
Flick's Germany from those Germany, and it felt like it felt like a very powerful moment for this German national team, because obviously the nation's been crying out for for Flick to play one of the strikers that he has in that team, and it was just it was just a great moment to see, and it was great to see him score a great goal. It was great to see him get the recognition for being a fantastic striker, fantastic finisher of the ball. Like I said, not just some kind of bumbling target man who they can fire the ball off of. It was a great finish in its own right. So that was undoubtedly one of the positives, and it felt very cathartic, I think, probably for a lot of German football fans. But we were kind of talking before the show. We should talk about some of the negatives as well, because it's very easy to come away from a game like that where Germany finished the game in the ascendancy. Spain look a little lost for they're lost for words or lost for ideas as to how to see the game out. And although Füllkrug coming on and scoring that goal illustrates a point, and it offers hope to Germany fans by saying, finally got this number 9, finally got someone who can score these chances. This guy has to start up front the rest of the tournament. It also underlines the problems that have been plaguing Germany leading up to that point. The most obvious one on the night to me was just Thomas Müller in that number 9 role, and I know I'm mid-rant here, so just bear with me for a moment, but this was just so interesting to me that he decided to opt for Müller in that number 9 position. I talked about this on Twitter during the game. I was saying,
I love that you used the German word there, by the way.
What was that?
Opfer.
It was just, it's just, here's the thing, right? I could understand it if Germany had a head coach who had come from another club, and he'd never even been in the national team setup, so he'd never actually worked with Thomas Müller before. So he's looked at it on paper and said, look, we don't have a goal scorer in this team, we don't have a talisman. Thomas Müller, his record for Germany is outstanding. He's only a couple of goals off, he's not a couple of goals, he's some way off Miroslav Klose, but in historical context of the World Cup, he's one of the best players that's ever played in it in terms of scoring goals. So you can understand why on paper, or if you were to ask like an AI computer to pick a Germany team, you can understand why it would stick Thomas Müller up front. But tactically, it just didn't make any sense. And I thought he had a really poor game, all things considered. And I was kind of looking at some of like the kind of analytical stuff after the game, and the great guys at 12 Football put out their pass maps, and I'd retweeted this onto my timeline, so you can find it on Twitter. But if you look at that pass map and the way they do this, I'm sure most of the listeners know how these work by now, but basically the thickness of the line between one player and another shows how often each player passed the ball to one another. And Thomas Müller doesn't have a single line going towards him, and that basically denotes that he was extremely hard to get the ball to. And I just thought it was really telling that, once Flick changed that up and Füllkrug went up front there, it completely altered Germany's game. And while there's a great positive in that, in the sense that Germany now have a number 9, it also illustrates that maybe Thomas Müller in this team doesn't quite make sense anymore, at least the way things are going right now.
Yeah, I mean, I said it in the last podcast, right? I would have dropped Müller and started Mukuku instead. I'd probably be happy with Füllkrug against Costa Rica too. I have to maybe add one thing. I felt kind of bad for Thomas Müller because he was put in this position where he essentially had to chase the ball, right? He was, I don't have the number in front of me, but his mileage must have been insane in this game. Because you can say a lot of things about him, but he definitely put in the work. But unfortunately, that's not what suits him. He is a number 10. He's essentially what Musiala is now. Right? He's the guy who gives you that creative moment. And at Bayern Munich, his greatest strength was to be behind Robert Lewandowski. When he was most effective for Germany in 2010 and 2014, he was behind Miroslav Klose. That's his role. He is a guy who plays off an actual striker, not someone who chases the ball all the time. And he will do it because it's Thomas Müller. You tell him to do something on the field. He's a Bayern Munich player. He is a soldier. He is loyal. He is willing to sacrifice himself, or as he said in German, opfer himself for the greater good. But that doesn't do anyone any good. I think that is the main takeaway I have from this. It doesn't help him. It doesn't help the German national team, and it ultimately doesn't help Hansi Flick either, right? Because I thought two things really changed when they made the changes to bring on Phil Krug and Leroy Sané, and I think we need to spend a bit of time on him as well because he was incredible. I think he changed the complexion of this team completely. And would probably actually been really good in the Müller role in the first half if he had been 100% fit. But him coming on and Füllkrug being on, all of a sudden Jamal Musiala, who I thought was hacked to pieces by Spain, and there was a couple moments where I thought he was absolutely destroyed out there. We're talking about protecting players, and we were talking about a lot about Neymar, but Busquets was the only player to get a yellow card off of a Musiala foul. The only one. Gavi took him down. Busquets took him down again. This countless times. I felt bad for him, but he handled it really well. But Musiala, all of a sudden when Sané and Füllkrug were on, you had the sense that there was actually someone he could play the ball to, right? There was an outlet for him. And he had that moment just before Füllkrug actually made it 1-1. Remember when he came down the sidelines and he slalomed his way through and he plays an incredible power pass to the middle and Füllkrug just about misses it. It comes off his lower abdomen, to be polite about it, and goes out. But all of a sudden there was someone there for Musiala to play the ball to. And the attack changed completely. I still think that, and I think that's maybe the next pro here of this game, that Musiala had an incredible game and never really crumbled by the tons of pressure that was put on him to be the creative guy and also obviously being the target. And I don't blame Spain for doing this. The best players get tackled. That's how this game is. Every other world-class player, ask Messi, ask Neymar, the same thing will happen to them, right? And I think he handled that really well. And I think that there was a lot of maturity there. And I think he will learn from this game, a ton from this game. And then, maybe in the next game. And Costa Rica is not going to be easier. They're not going to back off him either. I live in the CONCACAF region. I see them play a lot. They're a tough bunch. And they're going to do everything in their power to make it hard for him. And I think this was a good lesson for him today. And I think he handled it really well.
Yeah, I thought Musiala was probably Germany's best player, to be perfectly honest with you. Not only in terms of his technical ability and remarkable ability to hold the ball up, which is just such an underrated skill. If you think about it, we always think of Musiala as this player who darts past players. He finds space, he scores goals in these little cracks in defences, but to be playing with your back to goal and to take these remarkable touches that keeps the ball away from a central defender who, with every right, should be able to go through the back of you, just considering the size differences. I was routinely impressed with how he managed to do that. He held the ball up far better than Thomas Müller, for example. And I think the other thing that was also incredibly impressive, and it just goes to show just what kind of a talent he is that he... As the game wore on and after Spain scored, he only seemed to become more and more determined to fix things, and I kind of tweeted out that LeBron James meme just before Germany pulled it back, and that's kind of how I felt about the game. It felt as if Musiala was trying to drag Germany kicking and screaming back into this match, and I thought it was quite telling that when Leroy Sané came on, who, as you said, I thought was tremendous, he immediately went to Jamal Musiala, and he's like, right, the only way we're going to get anything from this is if I link up with Musiala, and we provide the kind of pace that just kind of really terrified that Spanish defence. To be honest, we always knew that Spanish defence was a weak spot, and Spain's entire game plan is to basically just keep the ball so teams can't really hit that defence. But I thought Sani was excellent when he came on. I thought Musiala played a great kind of foil for him in that regard. And to kind of turn this around a little bit and to kind of play another negative, not on purpose, I'm not trying to be a downer here, but I think it's quite...
It's called a pros and cons podcast, so...
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just quite telling how much better Sani was in that role than someone like Serge Gnabry. I feel in these first two games we've been kind of waiting for Gnabry to do something, and I've said prior to the tournament that I kind of earmarked him as one of the players who I think really, considering his success at Bayern Munich, really should be doing a lot more for the German national team. He should really be standing up and being a talisman, being a kind of focal point in that attack. But he was completely outshone by Musiala tonight. And I thought in the limited game time that Sani had when he came on, and it was only 20 minutes or so, I thought Sani proved in those 20 minutes exactly why he has to start when fit over Gnabry, to be perfectly honest with you, because he's just far more direct. He can take a player on. He can link up really well with Musiala and other players, and it just goes. I think it's just So I'm not trying to accentuate negatives here by any means. I'm just trying to point out that going forward, I think Flick will probably look at that and say, well, if everyone's fit, then I'm probably dropping Gnabry and I'm maybe dropping Thomas Müller from his team, having already dropped Kai Havertz, which is quite interesting for one of the so-called big teams in European football, or the world football, sorry, one of the biggest European nations. After 2 games, there's a good chance that his 3 go-to forward players might end up on the bench for game 3.
Yeah, I mean, Havertz needs to go to a different club. We've been over that.
Can we talk about Havertz for a second? Have he just played no part in this game? Do you not think that's really, really interesting?
I think it's really interesting, but it's also consequential. I mean, he didn't offer anything for Germany in the first match, and the problem is it's so hard. I mean, it's really difficult for him, right? He's not a number 9. He's kind of like a number 10, sort of. But that role in eternity is now occupied by Musiala, right? You think anyone is ever going to muscle off Musiala for that role for the next 10 years? I don't think so. So it's going to get even harder when Florian Wirtz comes back, because you actually have to drop an additional guys once Wirtz and Musiala are going to carry that attack for the next 10 years, right? We can both agree on that. So where do you put Havertz then? Where do you put him?
It's a great point. It's something that you and I were talking with Chris before the game, and we're talking about how him and Timo Werner really mucked up their careers by that move to Chelsea. And I really think if you considering where Havertz was before he moved to Chelsea, and the fact that he probably had just about every top club in Europe interested in signing him, can you imagine how different things would be? It'd be a great what-if scenario for European football history that had Havertz opted for a move to another club like Liverpool or Manchester City or Real Madrid or Bayern Munich.
Bayern.
Yeah, Bayern's probably the big one there. So he's kind of got himself in this kind of hole, which he's going to have to pull himself out of one way or another. But I just think it's really telling that Germany pull things back. Flick starts with him on the bench, and that's him simply saying he didn't offer enough in the first game. And then, when the shit hits the fan, if you'll excuse my French, he turns to the bench and says, right, Füllkrug, on you go, do something for me. Not the former, generational talent that was once considered the most promising player in Germany.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick this I keep calling him a journeyman. It's not really the right term because he's spent most of his career at Werder Bremen, but second division player up until very recently. I'm going to turn to him and see if he can do something, which I just find that really fascinating in terms of the kind of how things develop going forward.
Yeah, but the team that wins the World Cup ultimately, and I'm not suggesting by any means that Germany will win the World Cup, but the team that does well at the World Cup is always the one that uses players that are currently in form. And Füllkrug has been scoring in the Bundesliga. He's the second best scorer in that league after Nkunku. So you're going to the guy that has the confidence at that very moment to put a a ball like that away. Like for Füllkrug, this is no difference than in the 89th minute Werder Bremen facing, I don't know, some other team in a relegation battle, and all he has to do for him in this moment, in the form that he is in, it's just a ball that he has to put away. And with Kai Havertz, that ball falls to him in that situation. He probably thinks about 5 different solutions and ultimately puts it over the crossbar, right? And for you to be successful at the World Cup, you need to trust the guy that is currently in the best form, not the one that is the most talented.
Yeah,
and that's how it works. And I think for Havertz situation is such an interesting one too, because I fully agree with you. You know, when he made that move to Chelsea, I thought that was actually quite odd, because it kind of reminds me, there's 2 players that kind of stick out to me in terms of comparison to Kai Havertz and the way that they are kind of lost in this national team and their respective club careers, why there is still hope that he can ultimately turn it around. So bear with me here. Toni Kroos is one, right? Totally different player than Toni Kroos. So I don't mean in terms of comparison of types of player he is. I'm going to get that with my second example. But Toni Kroos for the longest time had no role in this national team. Remember when Joachim Löw put him in like left midfield to, who was the Italian playmaker, Pirlo, to man-mark Pirlo in 2012? Remember that? Because like there was no role for Toni Kroos. Like other guys had to retire first for him to actually get into the team. And, you know, maybe for Kai Havertz, he needs to still kind of discover who he is as a player and find that perfect role for him. And sometimes that takes a little bit of time. And Toni Kroos is a great example where it did take a bit of time and he did become ultimately a world-class player and a World Cup winner, right? And multiple Champions League winner of Real Madrid. You need to be sometimes a bit patient with him. The other guy is Stefan Effenberg. Stefan Effenberg went abroad, went from Gladbach to Bayern, and then went abroad to Fiorentina, and it didn't really work out for him there. Then he went back to Gladbach and became a really big player at the club level. Then also for Bayern München, where he won the Champions League, right? But there was never a role for him in the national team. In fact, he retired early. Probably didn't help that he showed the middle finger to the Germany fans in 1994, but. My ultimate point is sometimes it's really hard to replicate for players what they do at the national team level, right? Because that role is simply not available to them. And Kai Havertz is an interesting one. I think he has to look at his club career, and knowing Flick, that conversation has been had, right? That sometimes, I don't know how you manufacture this. I mean, Timo Werner went back to Leipzig, and I think that was ultimately a good idea. I'm not suggesting Kai Havertz is going back to Leverkusen because they don't have the money. But maybe for Kai Havertz to go somewhere like Italy or Spain, or maybe back to Germany to one of the bigger clubs there, that could be ultimately a really good thing for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that kind of, I mean, I don't want to make this podcast about, you know, the Kai Havertz show and what he's doing for his career, but the only thing I'd really say is that I think when I speak to Chelsea fans, there are a lot of Chelsea fans who still think he's a great player and he can still do something for them, you know. So it's not really like the Timo Werner situation where I found myself routinely trying to defend him to Chelsea fans on Twitter or whatever else. It's quite the opposite. With Havertz, they appreciate he's a great player, he's got a lot of potential, and he shows that with moments of brilliance for Chelsea. He just hasn't managed to click for them just yet. So I'd be surprised if the club were willing to let him go, but I think the comparisons you make are fantastic. Another one is maybe Leroy Sané himself, you know, who perhaps a little differently because Sané was mostly injured more than anything else, but it just didn't work out for him at Manchester City for one reason or another, and he's now slowly but surely beginning to show that potential at Bayern. And to do that, he had to move back to Germany to a club that were going to sign him on specific conditions, and he's going to have to get himself far more disciplined on and off the field. Blah 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 blah. I'm not saying that Havertz maybe has those issues, but I think he maybe a move like that, something that suits him far better. But anyway, that's a long story. That's something we can discuss another time. Is there anything else from this performance that you think we should pick up on? There's one or two other things I want to maybe talk about, but I'll let you jump in first. Yeah.
Defense. I thought the defense was really good, actually. And I mean, both goalkeepers played with fire. I actually thought it was quite interesting that this was probably the most ball-playing goalkeepers in the tournament we've seen, and the only time chances did materialize was when the two goalkeepers played with fire, but I guess that's what happens when both attacking lines are really high. I want to give a huge compliment to Nico Schlotterbeck. Nico Schlotterbeck was obviously dropped for this game. He comes on in the second half late and makes a world-class tackle against, I think it was Morata who comes into the box, right? To essentially preserve the 1-1 draw. I think that is one of those things when a young defender who hadn't had a great start in his national team career comes in and says, I have to really get myself together here, and does it. I like to see that. I thought it was immense, and I think it's going to probably benefit him going forward. But I actually thought Rüdiger was really good. Obviously he didn't time his run well to give Germany the lead, but he carries that defense. And I thought Süle didn't stand out, which was a positive. Center backs, that's usually a good thing, right?
Well,
so that's maybe a positive.
He did have that problem for the goal. I do think he deserves some of the blame for that goal. And I actually agree with you. I thought the defense had some good games. I thought I thought Rudiger had a great game, as you said. Manuel Neuer, great game as well. Another huge save in that match as well.
That first one, holy crap.
I think he's already made like 3 world-class saves in the first 2 games, which says a lot about Germany right now, but also that he's still on top of his game. And I'll be the first to say that I was quite critical of him this season. I wasn't sure if he should start for Germany this World Cup, but there you go. It wasn't the first time I was wrong, and it certainly won't be the last one either. But I think other positives, I just still find people kind of going back and forth in this in terms of Twitter, but I think David Raum's been having a really good tournament so far.
I found the criticism odd too.
Everyone's been talking about whether why Robin Gosens wasn't picked, whether maybe Gunter should be starting some games, and I just feel like Raum hasn't really put a foot wrong for the most part. Some of his
have people not watched Robin Gosens at Inter Milan this season? Is that the issue? Do people not watch Serie A? I don't watch a lot of Serie A, but I've seen enough to know that he's not been good this year.
Yeah, it's just a very odd one. I thought he's been absolutely fine, and considering the kind of bomb scares throughout that team, I think he's been one of the more dependable players. Yeah. Again, Rudiger's great. But the big issue, which is still an issue, and I think it's still going to cause Germany huge problems, whether their tournament comes to an end against Costa Rica or in the latter stages, is that right back position. And I was kind of chatting away to Kevin Hatchard about this during the game, and I just don't understand why Baku or Henriks aren't in the squad, because it just strikes me as really weird that Klosterman gets brought on in the second half. A player who we're led to believe wasn't entirely fully fit, which is understandable because he's hardly played at all this season. But I'm just struggling to understand why he's in this team, because if he was brought, if Hansi Flick said, I need a right back in this team, then he could have went for Henriks, he's been playing kind of right wing back, right mid for Leipzig for much of the season, so he could have played right back at all. Baku, I know Wolfsburg didn't have a good start to the season, but he's still in that team as a right wing back, as they have been getting better, and he's shown for Germany in the past that he can do a job there. Or even Jonas Hoffmann as some sort of right wing back, and just switch to a back 3 and play Hoffmann and David Raum as wing backs. I don't understand why none of these options are better than playing Sula and Kehrer there, when both of them have now shown in these 2 games that they just cannot do that job. And it just seems like a really weird move from Hansi Flick, who we know from his time at Germany is a very tactically astute head coach. It seems weird to me that he's willing to kind of limit his team so much to play. It's almost like he's trying to. He's not willing to make the risk of playing an attacking fullback in that position over just sticking our central defender in there and hoping that it'll work, because it hasn't worked at all. I think it's probably played a large part in why Serge Gnabry's had a very poor tournament to date, because he just hasn't had any service to play off of from his fullback. And it still strikes me as like the fundamental. I know everyone keeps going on about need for a striker, and there's these huge discussions in the German media and across the international media about how Germany don't have a number 9 anymore and how they don't produce number 9s, blah blah blah. But to me, the bigger issue is that Germany also don't keep any clean sheets. And despite Hansi Flick's best efforts to play just about anyone there, nothing has worked. And I think that's going to be the bigger issue as this tournament goes on, and it'll be either an issue that Costa Rica take advantage of, or a better team later in the competition.
Yeah, right backs is a difficult one. I know right now. You remember how left backs used to be like the hot commodity, and then everyone started producing left backs, and now actually no one can even sell a left back to save their lives. Like talking to agents about, you both work at Transfermarkt, so we do this quite a bit. But like apparently left backs, the market is like super cold, and the market for right backs. I mean, Celtic just signed Alistair Johnston, right, for lots of money from the MLS because he's a right back. And like they're paying lots of money for a guy who's never played in Europe because the position is such high demand. So Germany is not the only one looking for right backs. Everyone is. But you make an interesting point there with the close to month situation. I just sort of wonder two things here. Germany had a similar issue in 2014, and ultimately Philipp Lahm had to go back to playing. I think it was his left back, and ultimately that he ended up playing, or right back. He had to play one of the wing back positions, and then Höwedes filled in as right back. I think that's how it worked. And I personally don't want to see it, but you almost wonder if Kimmich ultimately will be moved to the right back.
Yeah.
Because like,
but
it would solve the dilemma in central midfield as well.
But it won't, and I'll tell you why. And this is what I brought up when Flick mentioned, when he announced his squad for the tournament, they don't have a backup central midfielder in that squad. And I mentioned this at the time. I said if Kimmich or Goretzka or Gundogan get injured in this tournament, there isn't a single number 6 or holding midfielder in that squad that can play that position. And I was saying, why the hell is Julian Brandt in this team when you could have had someone like Max Arnold in there? And this is exactly the situation I was worried about. I mean, obviously, it's not an injury to one of these players, but if Kimmich has to play right back, and that means Hansi Flick no longer has that midfield trio, who, by the way, I thought had a great game. And talking about if I'm talking about Muller being singled out in those pass maps, if you look at Spain's pass maps, Gavi got no service whatsoever in that game, and Pedri was also struggling for game time or for ball possession as well. So that kind of game plan of Gundogan, Goretzka and Kimmich worked really well in the centre of the pitch. And if you're Hansi Flick, you're thinking, well, that's one of my strengths. I don't want to break that up. But
I know it's tricky, isn't it? I agree with you. I want to clarify this. I don't want Kimmich at right back, but I could see them do that in an emergency situation. But it's such a hard position right now, isn't it? To just like find the right guy. Yeah, you almost just want to have a guy that can hold the line there.
But they did. They could have played someone there. They could have. Are you telling me Baku or Hendricks couldn't have played right back tonight? That's the thing.
Yeah, they probably could have. They probably would have offered more pace, and you're right. Maybe that would have helped Serge Gnabry. I mean, you saw the difference on the left side, right? When Sane comes on and he links up with Raum.
Exactly. It's. And even Hoffman, as I know Hoffman's not great as a fullback, but as a wing back, he can't be bad. I think my only frustration with this is that it's a problem that Flick has just invented for himself. He intentionally went out of his way not to bring any kind of fully fit or natural right backs into that side, and it's continuing to cost Germany points in this competition.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about maybe Flick as the final point, because I think that was both pros and cons. I think he got the Müller totally wrong at the start. Although maybe Müller tired that backline enough for them to be sleepy when Füllkrug finally did come on. His substitutions were bang on. I thought his he completely messed it up against Japan. I think Gündogan coming off when Germany was still having the lead probably cost Germany the win against Japan because he held that line so well. But he did make the right decisions against Spain. Bringing on Füllkrug in that situation was very smart. I mean, he didn't have Sané in the first game. But the fact that he waited enough for Sané to actually have an impact, because we don't know how fit he is. I assume he will be fit by Thursday, and we're going to talk about the Thursday game in our next part, so I don't want to talk too much about it. But Sané and Füllkrug made a huge impact, and I think as much as he got the substitutions wrong in the previous game, I think he got him bang on in this one, right?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You could have very easily thrown Havertz on in that match, and nothing would have come of it. So he certainly deserves credit for that, and he certainly isn't above changing his system and his tactics and his player, his player selections in tournament, which is something that I think Jogi Löw often got criticised for. He almost felt very stuck in his ways. So Hansi Flick is definitely a far more reactive head coach, and like I said when we talked about the previous competition, I still feel like the squad was always one full of compromises, and it was one that was. And it was one that I think that if it is going to achieve anything like what Germany fans would consider a successful tournament, I still think that's only going to really be possible if Hansi Flick can kind of pull off some miracles in terms of his tactics and his system and his player position, his player selection. So I think that's one big positive from Germany to take from this game, is that Flick's a very kind of malleable head coach, and he's not above changing things. So they're still in the competition, so they still have time to kind of work on that.
I want to end on a really, really positive note. And gracias, amigo, to Costa Rica for keeping this team alive. Because I actually thought the performance against Spain was a really good one today. As a separate game, not in the context of this tournament. Let's say they had won the first game against Japan and they would have come up with a performance like today. I think we'd be all standing there applauding and saying, well, they have 4 points and they played well twice, right? So if you take just this game out of context, I think it was a very good performance. When you take everything as a whole, you ignore the Japan result completely. That was actually a really good performance. And actually a game maybe that they should have won in the end. They didn't, because, the ball didn't go in when Sané was through. And Unai Simon proved that he is an incredible goalkeeper, showed why De Gea is rightfully not in the squad. But I think as a standalone performance, this was a really good game. And if they do get the job done against Costa Rica and they pull off another performance, I think they showed today that they can go toe-to-toe with the biggest sides in the world, right? They might not win it, but they can go toe-to-toe with it. And if that is the ultimate takeaway from this tournament, I think that's something that Flick can work with. I think ultimately he still needs to get out of this group, which means Spain have to, I think, get a draw against Japan, right? And Germany needs to just score a bunch of goals against Costa Rica.
No, I think if Japan get a draw, then Germany. Oh no, actually no. Oh
then it goes to goal differential.
Yeah.
And so Germany will just have to. Germany will have to just win big against Costa Rica, and we assume that's enough. Again, we're going to preview that game later on this week, so stay tuned. But I think that is my positive takeaway from this game. They played well. They played much better than they have against Japan, and with a little luck, they should have probably won this game.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to end on, and I completely agree with you for the most part there. Actually, I think, I think Flick maybe is more comfortable setting his teams up against teams of equal quality or maybe better quality, because his team can be more reactive. We saw Germany do a really good job of break Spain down, limit their key players from getting the ball, and really frustrate Spain for the most part. And actually it led to, got to remember that Spain also scored from a substitute coming on and scoring. So their initial set tactics didn't work either. Whether or not Spain were 100% into this game or not remains to be seen. I think if I was a Spain football fan right now, I'd be furious that they've kind of let Germany back into this tournament, which is, something that could really end up biting them in the ass.
Costing you later.
Yeah, exactly. So their lack of kind of a bloodthirsty approach there might end up being a problem down the line. But yeah, I completely agree with you. It suggests that if Germany get out of this group and they come up against Spain or France or an England or whatever, they do have the tools to at least frustrate them to the point of making it equal level.
This is the big positive. I'm going to end it on this. As always, the show is brought to you by BetOnline. Germany is still alive somehow. We saw an incredible World Cup game today. I think that is a big takeaway as well. And we'll be back with the preview pod for subscribers later this week. And then obviously at the end of the week with our transfer show that we do every week. I think that's about it, right, Stefan? Anything final that you want to add?
Nope, sounds good.
All right. Until next time. Auf Wiedersehen.
Ende in Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.